Finding illegal substances on your cheating wife or catching her kissing a young guy? Which is worse? Our story today with a similar plot. Be patient and enjoy your viewing pleasure. New Year's Eve turned out to be cloudless, but the pale winter sun did not warm the frosty air at all. Whitehead's building was metal with spray foam insulation clinging to thin sheets of corrugated metal, but the cold seeped up through the bare concrete floor. Anthony Whitehead, director of operations, trembled as he crossed the floor, the loud clatter and whine of various machines making thinking almost impossible. He looked around and caught the eye of the shop's supervisor, Brett Collier. Anthony Whitehead was a tall man with pale blonde hair, a square face, and deep brown eyes. His shoulders were square, his chest muscular, and his waist narrow from years of working on oil rigs. Although his father could pay for his education, Anthony declared that he would earn his own living and let his father go to hell. Anthony now spent 3 mornings a week at Arthur Porter's gym to stay in shape. Arthur Porter trained Garland Louvier, a rising star poised to become the next heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Garland's last fight was against Xavier Smith, a seasoned heavyweight. Overconfident, Garland entered the ring but didn't come out. Instead, his body was strapped to a stretcher, covered with a white sheet, and carried out of the ring. Arthur Porter trained everyone as if they could become the next Garland Louvier. "Yes, sir," Brent said. Anthony tensed. Brent Collier had a special way of saying yes, sir, as if you were saying your 5th point, sir. Brent Collier was the type of person who smiles in your face and then slashes all your tires and pours sugar into your gas tank when you're not looking. At 3:30, send everyone home. Tell them Happy New Year and we'll see them on the 2nd, okay? Said Anthony. Yes, sir, Brent said with a new accent. They will be paid until 5:30. No one loses their watch, Anthony clarified. As soon as the last one checks out, please put the time sheets at my door. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir, Brent said again, smartly. Anthony walked away from the now grinning supervisor. Anthony, your father is dead. That's how this nightmare began. Anthony Marcus Whitehead received a phone call at 6:42 in the morning, painfully hungover. He pushed aside 4 or 5 empty beer cans and knocked back 2 of them to grab the ringing, dancing cell phone. Cheyenne, his wife, cursed loudly and rolled over. Anthony also cursed when he saw beer leaking from overturned cans staining the carpet. Anthony, your father is dead, said Susan Whitehead, his mother. Anthony's father had suffered a disabling stroke 2 years after marrying ash blonde Natasha Jenbach. He barely held on for another 3 years. Finally, Anthony thought, well, this is not surprising. Crap, what time is it now? Tell them to call back, Cheyenne complained loudly. Cheyenne's blue eyes sparkled furiously, but she held back her response. Susan continued to give Anthony information about the funeral and visitation. Anthony asked his mother if she had called the others in their family. Susan agreed that she had not. He was the first person she had called. Anthony said goodbye and ended the call. My father died, okay? My father died, and you sit here and make noise. Anthony shouted at his angry wife. Well, excuse me, how was I supposed to know about this? Cheyenne shouted in response. Anthony got out of bed and went downstairs, turning on the light in the kitchen. He saw several hundred cockroaches scatter and smelled a putrid odor he couldn't identify. Oh my God, I can't believe it, Anthony muttered darkly as he began cleaning the kitchen. What are you doing? Cheyenne asked, scratching one of her surgically enhanced breasts. What do you think I'm doing, Cheyenne? I know you've never seen anyone in your family do this, but you know what cleaning looks like, Anthony answered sharply. Oh, Anthony, Cheyenne snapped, pouring herself a glass of wine. God, Cheyenne, it's not even 7 in the morning, Anthony said. Hangover drink, Cheyenne replied sharply. Anthony saw that the kitchen waste bin wouldn't be able to hold all the waste, so he went to the garage and found a garden bag. As he carried the bag to the front door, Cheyenne decided she needed a little more hangover. Upon returning from the curb, Anthony began brewing coffee. An inspection of the refrigerator revealed several containers and boxes from various restaurants, but nothing that could be used for breakfast. Another garden bag was filled from the fridge and freezer. A tightly rolled flyer from the Courtyard Mall served as a temporary insect trap. After Anthony drank a mug of bitter coffee, which for some reason had a burnt taste, he entered the living room. In the living room, it was clear that the mahogany coffee table and matching end tables were covered in numerous round marks from beer cans, none of which had been placed on coasters to protect the expensive furniture. There were a few mysterious scratches that Anthony could not determine the source of. The entire time, Anthony sweated and strained to clean the house, his headache pounding non-stop. He wanted a drink, a can or four of beer, or to open the fifth bottle of gin he saw on the mahogany shelf. "What do you want for lunch?" Cheyenne asked as she walked out of the kitchen, another glass of wine in hand. "You cook?" asked Anthony. "Yes, of course." "Are you drunk?" Cheyenne laughed. "Now I'll call Hopkins and let them prepare it." "Yeah, well, hot and sour soup and twice-cooked pork," Anthony decided, looking around the living room and not knowing where to start. "Okay," she said. "It will be ready in 20 minutes. Will you go in your own car?" Anthony asked, deciding to try the furniture polish and paper towel on the coffee table. "Sure," Cheyenne said, raising her glass of wine. "Damn, Cheyenne, busy. Okay, never mind, it's not important," said Anthony, seeing that the polish had no effect on the surface of the table. After lunch, Cheyenne put more than half of her food into the now nearly empty refrigerator. Anthony ran the vacuum cleaner over the carpet in their living room. Cheyenne switched from wine to vodka and watched Anthony with an amused expression on her face. Crap. As he walked, he noticed how dirty the steps looked. Apparently, they had not been swept or washed for a long time. The bathroom light flickered and then illuminated the room with a bright light. The lamp above the mirror once had 3 frosted bulbs, now only one light bulb had a frosted cap softening the lighting. The other 2 bulbs were unprotected, unfiltered, and the light stung his tired eyes. His face was swollen with bags under his eyes, covered with thick light brown stubble. His blonde hair was disheveled and unkempt. "What are you doing now?" "Look how beautiful you are," Cheyenne taunted, finding Anthony's actions funny. Anthony looked at his wife's reflection in the mirror. He knew why he started dating a rude, loud girl. Her breasts were huge, her blonde hair was dyed. Anthony actually liked her dark roots. Most importantly, Cheyenne angered Marcus Whitehead. Cheyenne Allison Frick went up against Marcus Whitehead, and the fear of pregnancy drove Marcus so crazy that he threatened to kill the blonde girl. Susan didn't like Cheyenne either, but she tried to persuade her with gentle words rather than threats. The most Susan could do was get Anthony to agree to a prenuptial agreement. Cheyenne refused to sign the document, but Anthony, on the verge of finishing his master's degree in engineering, knowing that his monthly salary from the St. and parish government was more than Cheyenne and her mother's annual income combined, stood his ground. "Put your John Hancock on the dotted line, Miss Frick, or you can keep the engagement ring as a parting gift," Anthony stated calmly. After uttering a series of curses, Cheyenne nevertheless scribbled her signature on the indicated line, casting death glares at Anthony's lawyer. Cheyenne initialed each page of the 7-page document and then signed the last page. "Well, what about her things, huh?" asked Uncle Tommy. "Okay, I'll play your game," Anthony said, looking at the bloated man. "What does she bring to this marriage?" "The marriage is ending. For some reason, she can keep her breasts and her tattoos." "What else does she have?" Now, 14 years after their wedding, Anthony wondered what had made him marry Cheyenne Allison Frick. He looked at the dirty mirror in the bright light of the bathroom and wondered why he had allowed himself to be convinced to buy this monstrosity of a house. He wondered when and how he had turned into the swollen, unkempt man he saw in the mirror. Luckily, the water heater worked. Anthony used a damp cloth to soften his 3 or 4-day-old stubble, then he began to shave. Cheyenne got tired of watching his efforts and went in search of more alcohol. The entire time he shaved, Anthony's headache throbbed relentlessly. God, how do blind people shave? Anthony wondered aloud, wanting to close his eyes from the bright light. After the shower, Anthony found a shirt. After putting on the shirt, Anthony received another shock. The shirt didn't fit his chubby body. He barely managed to fasten it around his stomach. It was the same with his best suit. "We're almost out of beer," Cheyenne said as he walked down the stairs. And Mom said she was really sorry to hear about your dad. Tell her it's very noble of her, said Anthony. Cheyenne, it's almost 4 o'clock. When do you usually take a shower? Don't know, whenever I want, Cheyenne shrugged, handing him the jar. I don't want it anymore, Anthony said. More than what? Cheyenne asked. What did you have it upstairs for? Anthony replied. No, Cheyenne, I don't want it anymore. I don't want this crap. God, look around you. It was a $200,000 house. We'd be damn happy to get $100,000 for it the way it is now. And look at me. On our wedding day, I weighed 171. I'm afraid to step on the scale to see how much I weigh now, Anthony said sharply. I still weigh 124, Cheyenne boasted, pointing at her body. You're 5.2, Anthony said, looking around the living room. I do, Cheyenne assured shrilly. No more. No more of everything, Anthony said. I hope you don't think this is about me, Cheyenne said, her eyes widening. Of course not, Anthony said, heading into the garage. I expect you to do whatever you want, whenever you want, how you want. Anthony went to his mother's house. Jimmy and Lisa Whitehead, his sister and brother, were already there. After knocking once, Anthony entered the house and found Susan, Lisa, and Jimmy drinking coffee at the breakfast table. As usual, Susan sat between Jimmy and Lisa. I hope there's another cup, Anthony said, hugging his sister and then his mother. Yeah, Susan agreed. Call your sisters, Lisa demanded. They won't come. Oh, okay, Anthony said. Damn, it was a spontaneous decision for me. No, they say they won't go to the funeral, Jimmy clarified. I'll talk to them, Anthony promised. I need you to say the obituary, Susan said quietly. What? Anthony laughed bitterly. What do you expect me to say? That he was a fool who didn't know how to make concessions? That it was always his way or not at all? That he only did something when it benefited him? He was a good father, his ex-wife defended. Yes, Mom, he was a wonderful father, Anthony thought sarcastically. Honestly, I don't think I can handle it well, Anthony admitted. I'll still stay. Thank God, Jimmy guessed as Anthony swallowed 3 aspirin tablets with a sip of coffee. No, Jimmy, hemorrhoids, Anthony replied sarcastically. So stop being a pain in my heel point, Anthony said reproachfully. Before leaving his mother's house, Anthony agreed to persuade Cindy and Barbara to come to the funeral. He also agreed to deliver the obituary. He congratulated Jimmy on his 10th anniversary and asked Lisa how his niece Gracie was doing. She gets a B for the semester, Lisa said proudly. Do you have money? Cheyenne asked when Anthony returned home. A couple of bucks. For what? Lionel will come. We'll bring about 300 Bahama Black, Cheyenne said. Well, Cheyenne, that's a problem, Anthony replied. You see, I don't want this crap in my house anymore, and since you want it, I guess you'll have to find a way to get those 300 bucks. I won't pay a penny. What? Cheyenne sighed in shock. Not sure what you mean by what, but I'll say it again. I don't want this in my home. I do not need it. I won't pay for it. Moreover, I'm seriously thinking about throwing out all the alcohol too. Oh no, you wouldn't dare, Cheyenne barked. However, Cheyenne somehow found $300 by the time Lionel Turner arrived. The man looked disgusted as he slowly counted the crumpled bills. Anthony almost poured himself some gin but didn't. Instead, he busied himself with other things, trying to write his father's obituary. While Cheyenne was sleeping, Anthony found her wallet and took out all her credit and debit cards. He did the same with his wallet, leaving himself with only one credit card. The cards were locked in a small safe in their home office, along with any documents associated with their cards. Bank statements were also locked, inaccessible to Cheyenne. The next morning, while Cheyenne slept, Anthony got dressed and headed to Dusty's country kitchen for a hearty breakfast. His headache did not go away, and with renewed vigor, his hands shook terribly while he drank his coffee. Where the hell are my cards? Cheyenne screamed into her cell phone. What cards, Cheyenne? You don't have any cards, Anthony replied calmly. Internally, he wanted to avoid this conflict with his wife. My cards. The ones that were in my wallet. Really? Then why wasn't your name on them? Asked Anthony, and stopped. My head hurts enough as it is, you know. He ended the call just as she started shouting back. Apparently, it took her a few seconds to notice that she was alone, and Anthony let the call go to voicemail. As he listened to the first millisecond of her voicemail, Anthony wondered where Cheyenne got the strength to scream like that. His head hurt too much to speak louder than a whisper because Cheyenne Whitehead's name was not listed on the account. Mitch Duffer of First Union Bank called Anthony Whitehead when Cheyenne contacted the bank for a new debit card. Mr. Duffer, Cheyenne Whitehead can get a card for any account she already has at your bank, Anthony said. Thank you, Mr. Whitehead, Mitch replied. Any account she already has with your bank? Anthony repeated. Any account, Mitch confirmed. She has no right to it and will not have access to it. If Cheyenne Allison Frick Whitehead gets one dime of my money, I'll find another bank to do business with. Are you clear, Mr. Duffer? Absolutely, Mr. Whitehead, Mitch agreed and ended the conversation. After a moment, Anthony let his wife's call go to voicemail again. She left a 1-minute, 48-second tirade on his voicemail. Anthony lowered the volume and listened to the enraged message. He looked around and realized he was driving past Whitehead Generators, a large corrugated steel building that made generators, substations, and equipment that bore his father's name, his own name. He turned into a large parking lot and stopped the car. I'll divorce your heel point, you hear? Cheyenne continued to scream. Oh, thank you, Jesus, Anthony said out loud. Yes, Cheyenne, yes. That's the first sensible thing you've said. Nick Fowler, his lawyer and the man who wrote the prenuptial agreement, had died. Anthony felt a pang of horror. He didn't remember when Mr. Fowler had died. He vaguely recalled receiving a letter from the law firm Ferguson, Benoit, Fowler, and Jones about his cases but couldn't remember the name of the lawyer who had taken over Nick Fowler's cases and clients. Ferguson, Benoit, Fowler, and Jones. If you know the number of the person you want to reach, enter it now, then press the pound key. For information about our catalog, click 311. For hours and directions, press 312. For the general mailbox, press 313. To contact the operator, press 0, the man said in a soft voice. Anthony pressed 311 and listened to the answering machine read out the names. He didn't recognize any of them, so he decided to go home and look for the letter in his office. Returning home turned out to be a bad idea. Cheyenne was still in an alcoholic delirium, and her mother and her mother's current boyfriend, Uncle Bootsy, were there too. For some reason, Uncle Bootsy decided he needed to teach Anthony about Cheyenne's rights as his wife in financial matters. Anthony began recording the confrontation on his cell phone. Sir, get out of the way, Anthony said. This is my home. I will not tolerate you coming into my home and interfering in my affairs. No, no, son, Uncle Bootsy said, pointing a bony finger at Anthony's chest. Sir, don't touch me again, Anthony warned. The old man didn't listen and poked his finger into Anthony's chest again. The man smiled as Anthony hit him. I was in the army, boy, Uncle Bootsy laughed easily, parrying Anthony's clumsy blow. Anthony's foot shot forward and hit Uncle Bootsy square in the groin. He raised his knee and crushed Uncle Bootsy's nose. Mrs. Frick, you and your boyfriend need to leave my house now, Anthony ordered. The woman who had been screaming in Cheyenne suddenly fell silent. Anthony locked himself in his home office and began looking for the letter from Ferguson, Benoit, Fowler, and Jones. He noticed that his desk had been opened and looked at the safe. The heavy safe had been moved, but without the key, Cheyenne had little chance of opening it. Carter Foley, Anthony said when he found the letter. The email included Carter's email address, and Anthony logged into his computer immediately. There was a knock on his office door. The police are here, fool, Cheyenne shouted through the door. They want to talk to you. Yeah, that was fast, Anthony muttered. Without sirens, the rabbit hit me there, son, Uncle Bootsy muttered, his face still covered in blood. The old man's eyes widened and he gasped as Anthony hit him in the solar plexus. Groaning, Uncle Bootsy collapsed onto the heavily stained carpet. "Nice try, Cheyenne," Anthony chuckled. "Mrs. Frick, you and the month-long loser here need to leave my house." "My house too," Cheyenne squealed. "He has a pacemaker." Cheyenne's mother screamed, trying to resuscitate Uncle Bootsy. "Then call an ambulance." "He's not going to get any better lying here on the floor," Anthony said calmly and closed and locked his office door again. When Anthony heard the sirens, he opened the door. He chuckled as Cheyenne realized that 2 police cars had also arrived with the ambulance. Apparently, when she told the 911 operator that her husband had beaten her mother's boyfriend, the operator thought it wise to send the police along with an ambulance. Cheyenne frantically tried to hide all traces of illegal substances and other paraphernalia from the living room. The kitchen, being the closest room, became her target as she rushed back and forth. "Right here," Anthony said, pointing. "Officer, you might want to take a look in the refrigerator." "You damn fool!" Cheyenne screamed, rushing at Anthony. Anthony allowed himself to be handcuffed and placed in a police car. The officer apologized, but since the 911 call claimed Anthony started the initial confrontation, he had no choice but to arrest him. Cheyenne, however, resisted arrest much more actively. The ambulance loaded the stretcher, and Donna Frick left in the ambulance with John Bootsy. "Here are your keys, sir," the officer's partner said, handing the keys to Anthony. "The house is locked. Press this button on the key fob, and the alarm will make 3 sounds." "So it's installed?" Anthony asked. "Yes, sir," the officer replied, placing the keys in Anthony's shirt pocket. Anthony looked around at the crowd of neighbors gathered on the opposite side of the street. He smiled and nodded to his neighbors. Although he and Cheyenne had lived in this house for several years, he could not name any of the curious faces. "Hey, do me a favor, will you?" Anthony said as he watched Cheyenne struggle to get into the second police car. "Yes, sir," asked the first officer. "Hey, don't put us in the same cell, okay?" Anthony smiled. "We'll see what we can do," the first officer said with a broad smile. "We won't promise," the second officer laughed. "Usually, guys give us the most trouble, huh?" the first officer said to his partner, turning on the car. "Ferguson, Benoit, Fowler and Jones. If you know the number of the subscriber you want to reach, please enter it now, then press the pound key," the voice said in a friendly manner. Anthony typed 419 and the pound key. A moment later, Carter Favre's voice came over the line, inviting Anthony to leave a message. "Sir, your wife wants to know who her lawyer is," the policewoman asked. "I have no idea," Anthony replied. "I didn't know she had a lawyer." "You're enjoying this, sir?" the first arresting officer asked. Carter Favre was a handsome African-American with a firm handshake. His face showed no emotion as Anthony explained what had happened. He just nodded when Anthony stated that he would also use Carter for his divorce. "First things first," the lawyer finally said. "Let's have your preliminary hearing, then we'll worry about everything else." "Damn fool," Anthony muttered. "No, you can't tell me to shut up," Cheyenne yelled at Anthony and the bailiff as he and Carter entered the St. and Parish Courthouse. "Participant number 2, Carter said, showing a sense of humor he hadn't shown before. "Yes, guess what? We have lovely farewell gifts for her," Anthony joked. "Zelda, tell her she won," Carter said, pointing to the spot. "Let me talk to David Hightower. Let's see what he has." Carter and David Hightower, the assistant district attorney for St. and Parish, leaned their heads toward each other, whispered, and then walked away. David looked at the documents, glanced at Anthony, and nodded to the civil engineer. "They didn't tell me you worked for St. and," Carter accused, turning back to Anthony. "Sorry, I swear I thought I mentioned it," Anthony replied. "Anyway, since he knows where you work, he doesn't think you're likely to run away," Carter said. "That allows you to testify. I guess we're going for not guilty, and you're out of here." "Depends. I don't even know what I'm accused of," Anthony admitted. "Domestic violence, assault, and battery," Carter said. "Then yes, innocent," Anthony agreed. "Damn it," Anthony muttered. "Let me out of here." Cheyenne screamed as Judge Linda Newberg slammed her gavel, releasing Anthony after David Hightower didn't request bail. Keep screaming, Anthony chuckled as Judge Newberg ordered the bailiff to escort the female inmate out of the courtroom. Anthony went home, shaved, showered, and found some comfortable pants and a decent shirt. He then called Carter's office. "Okay, I passed the preliminary hearing. Let's get on with the rest," Anthony said. "Don't waste time, huh?" Carter asked. "My father died yesterday." "No, 2 days ago," Anthony continued. "Mr. Favre, I'm really sorry for your loss," Carter said, sounding almost sincere. "And I have no idea what, if anything, I will inherit," Anthony continued. "Knowing my father, it could be a box of dirty diapers and a note asking me to kiss his heel point." Carter asked. "Not the best relationship," Anthony admitted. "But if it's even $1, I want to make sure Cheyenne Allison Frick Whitehead doesn't get a dime from this. So do we file for divorce before the will is read?" "She will have no rights to anything, and we have a prenuptial agreement," Carter said. "Thanks to her behavior in court this morning, we know where she can be found to serve the summons." Anthony chuckled. The visitation to farewell Marcus Whitehead was quiet. Anthony tried to squeeze his body into the black suit and found that he couldn't. Abdul sold him a new suit and a fresh white shirt to go with it. Cindy and Barbara, the Whitehead family twins, appeared at the farewell ceremony. Anthony explained to both that they had not come for their father, rather, their appearance was to please their mother. Anthony's obituary spoke largely of the empire his father built and his few philanthropic endeavors. He also shared a slightly funny anecdote with business acquaintances and several friends and family members who were in attendance. "I don't even remember what stupid thing I did. I mean, really, out of the thousands and thousands of stupid things I've done, try to remember one specific incident. Anyway, I did something stupid, and my dad just sighed and said to me, 'You know, there's no trick to loving a good child, but damn, you've got to know all the tricks to love a bad one.'" I wonder who he was talking about, huh? "Well, Dad, I'm sure God is using every trick in the book to love you now," Anthony concluded. "Lord, big brother," Lisa said in a whisper, "it was so sweet that I almost believed you meant it." "Bite me off," Anthony chuckled and hugged his sister. Somehow, Cheyenne managed to turn her stint in the St. Ann Parish Jail into addiction treatment at DG Guard's chemical ward. The only reason Anthony knew about this was that Cheyenne was covered through his insurance with St. Ann Parish. Carter shrugged, unable to do anything since Cheyenne could not be extradited. The CDU could not release the names of any of its patients and could not tell Carter Favre whether Cheyenne Allison Frick Whitehead was a patient at their facility, even though he knew she was there because of his client's insurance. Whether Carter Favre was a lawyer or not made no difference to the institution since the divorce in question was considered a civil matter. Carter shrugged again and contacted Anthony Whitehead. "She's either incredibly smart or incredibly lucky," Carter told Anthony seriously. "Incredibly manipulative, incredibly cunning, incredibly selfish," Anthony sighed. "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow." The reading of the will was a bit of a surprise for the Whitehead clan. Even though Marcus had turned his back on them to woo the now-married Natasha Jenbach, even marrying the younger woman when her divorce from Dwight Date became final, he did not turn his back on his ex-wife or his children and grandchildren. In his will, Marcus made provisions for them. "I suggest we call a board meeting immediately," Susan said seriously as they sat in the conference room of the lawyer's office. Susan's appointment as chief executive officer of Whitehead Generators was approved fairly easily, with only one vote against Anthony's appointment as COO, and that was Anthony himself. "Hey, in case you forgot, am I currently working officially employed at St. Ann?" Anthony asked. $42,000 a year or $500,000 a year? "Even if you went to UL, you should understand that," Jimmy said. "You protect my money, Gracie's money, as well as yours," Lisa persuaded him. "Damn, okay, I'll resign on Monday," Anthony sighed in response to everyone. "It's blackmail, using Gracie against me." On Monday morning, after Anthony left his boss's office, his insurance company contacted him immediately. Anthony shook his head and called Carter. Cheyenne had been discharged without permission. "Damn," Anthony told the man. Carter contacted Cass Jackson and gave the procedural officer the address of Mrs. Donna Frick and the addresses of Anthony and Cheyenne Whitehead. The man smiled and assured Carter that he would get down to business. "Yo, yo, yo," Cass Jackson said as Donna opened the door to her trailer. "Hey, Mom. Eliel told me to say hi to Cheyenne. You know what I mean?" "Lionel," Cheyenne said from behind Donna. "Damn, that was fast. Just called him, 5 minutes ago?" Cass smiled widely. "You know how it happens. I was nearby and your boyfriend called me." "Okay, here's $200, Cheyenne said, holding out 2 brand new $100 bills. "Hey, no, wait, take them back. We'll need them," Cass said, losing his smile and accent. "Mrs. Whitehead, you have been served with a summons." "What?" Cheyenne asked, shocked, as Cass pushed a manila folder into her hands. "You know what it is," Cass laughed. "Have a nice day, everyone." Anthony didn't have to guess whether Cheyenne had been notified. She called his cell phone, sent him several threatening text messages, then called his work phone and screamed at him when he answered. "Penne, I'm at work," Anthony said calmly. Anthony didn't feel calm inside. He didn't like confrontation. "Do you remember I supported you when your husband left and I took over your responsibilities here while you went to court trying to get alimony from that scoundrel?" Anthony reminded Anna quietly. "You're right," Anna said after a long silence. "You really did." "A place appeared near that shopping center, Apco Grand," Anthony said. "Do you want to go there for lunch?" "I cannot. Brianna needs braces," Anna answered. "I'll treat you," Anna said. Anthony, at lunch, listened to his colleague talk about what the future held for him, a lonely existence, even with 3 children crammed into a 2-room apartment. An existence where you have to choose between braces for Brianna and a new jacket to replace the one that's falling apart. When you have to tell children that their desire to go to a trampoline park or go karting on their birthday is simply impossible. "I love them, this is my life, you know." But God, sometimes, and sighed heavily as the waitress assured them that their lunch would be ready soon. "What do you do for fun?" asked Anthony. "Putting pins into my ex-husband's voodoo doll," Anne answered. "I wanted children," Anthony said. "My niece Gracie, God, what a beautiful girl she is. It breaks my heart every time I think about it. Either way, I would love to have my own little Gracie, my own Brianna or Shannon, or his own little Ricky, even if he likes football. If you want them, they're yours," and joked, "enchilada without rice." The waitress interrupted them. "Here," Anthony said, but it never seemed like the right time. Cheyenne needed this, she wanted that. Now, looking back, I understand. If we had a child, the child would have to compete with his mother for everything he wanted. "Thank you for lunch," Anne said as they left the restaurant. "Thank you for listening," Anthony replied, opening the car door for her. "Damn, I did more talking than you," Anne reminded him. "Was I didn't listen?" Anthony joked. Over the next week, Cheyenne alternated between asking Anthony to pay off his debt to Nathan Garcia and asking him to come home. His offer to pay the debt in exchange for her agreeing to the terms of the divorce was met with outcries. "Do you know why divorce is so expensive?" Anthony asked, and when he hung up after another call from Cheyenne. "Why?" she asked, not looking up from the documentation for the proposed butterfly park. "Because it's worth it," Anthony said. "I'll have meatless chili for dinner today." "No, not because we are vegans. It's just that it's 3 days until payday," said Anne. "Sounds delicious," Anthony replied. "Kiss my heel point, Whitehead," Anne snapped. "It sounds terrible because it is terrible." Now his last day of work was coming to an end. Some colleagues stopped by his office and wished him good luck. Some pretended to measure his office, pretending to move in. Before his car left its assigned parking space, he said, "Hey, Def Franco, I did a little research. One of these ranch things is for a single month, a mom and her 2 girls and a boy. It's only a couple of $100 for a whole week. So, there you go." "What?" and screamed when Anthony handed her an envelope with 4 tickets. The location was in Oakleaf, Texas. "We need to use them before the end of the year," Anthony said. Anthony spent his first day at Whitehead Generators walking around the facility, getting to know the employees and observing how they worked. His head ached and his ears were ringing before an hour had passed. Leaving work, his head pounding and his ears ringing, Anthony noticed a low cinder block building. The banner announced that Arthur Porter's gym was now open. The ringing in his ears did not prevent Anthony from hearing Arthur Porter, who was almost deaf. He didn't speak, he was yelling with his teeth chattering. Arthur sized up Anthony, shook his head in disgust, and signed him up for a year's gym membership. Carter informed Anthony that Cheyenne required counseling. Anthony actually laughed but agreed to go. "Who knows," said Anthony. "Yes, let's try consultations." "Okay," Carter said. "If she pays for it," Anthony added. "Okay," Carter smiled. "What the hell should I pay my beauty?" Cheyenne yelled into the phone. "Cheyenne, do you know another way to talk?" Anthony sighed. "My head already hurts from all the noise at work. I don't care how you pay for consultations, but if that's what you want, you have to pay for this. You don't want to work on our marriage?" Cheyenne asked with pity. "Honestly, no," Anthony admitted. Somehow, Cheyenne found a way to pay for her first consultation session with Dr. Sylvia Hoopen. In the waiting room, Anthony nodded politely to Cheyenne and continued filling out the form. In the employer column, he wrote no. In the insurance column, he again wrote no. In the additional source of income column, he wrote obscenity. Marn Vole, Dr. Hoopen's receptionist, smiled when Anthony handed her the clipboard. The attractive middle-aged woman immediately began entering Anthony's information into the computer. "It's disgusting," exclaimed the woman, whose eyes flashed with anger. After a moment, Anthony grinned at her. She was still angry when Cheyenne handed her the information she had scribbled on her forms. "Dr. Hoopen will see you now," Marn said, pointing to the door. "Ladies first," Anthony said, the first words he had spoken to Cheyenne since they entered the small waiting room. 10 minutes into the session, Anthony no longer believed that Dr. Sylvia Hoopen could help him and Cheyenne repair their relationship. Within 10 minutes, he was tired of the woman's one-sided opinions and her fortune cookie-style advice. "Sylvia," asked Dr. Hoopen after Cheyenne had taken almost 35 minutes of the 50-minute session. "Yes?" Anthony answered politely. "How do you feel about what your wife said?" Sylvia asked. "Oh, well, it was nice," Anthony replied. "What exactly was pleasant?" Sylvia was surprised at his unexpected answer. "Well, it was nice to hear that she can talk and not just scream like she usually does," Anthony said. After the third session, Sylvia recommended several individual sessions in addition to family counseling. "Oh God, no," Anthony objected. "Well, Anthony, it's obvious that you have some anger towards women," Dr. Cooperstein began reproachfully. "I love my mother. She's as graceful and elegant a woman as you could ever meet," Anthony said. "She has a huge stick up her fifth spot," Cheyenne said mockingly. "And my sister Lisa, we're best friends," Anthony continued, ignoring Cheyenne. "Another with a stick up her fifth spot. I mean, it's a gold-plated stick," but Cheyenne turned to Dr. Cooperstein. "And then there's my niece Gracie," Anthony continued, "his perfect little angel." Cheyenne said mockingly. Anthony stood up and left the doctor's office, ignoring Martin as he left the building. Since Cheyenne was the one asking for these sessions, she had to pay for them. "Did I hear you call Dr. Hooperstein a charlatan?" Carter laughed on the phone. "So much for medical confidentiality." Anthony laughed in response. Neither Carter nor Anthony knew how Cheyenne or her lawyer managed to arrange it, but they ended up in Judge Ken Thott's office. Cheyenne sat with a satisfied smile on her face as her lawyer made a plea to force Anthony to return for counseling and pay for it. "Anyone except that charlatan Sylvia Hooperstein," Anthony objected. "And since my client has already completed 3 sessions, no more than 5 additional sessions," Carter asked. "Is Dr. P. Kevorkian available?" Anthony asked out loud. "He died a few years ago, I'm afraid," Judge Thiel chuckled. 8 sessions with a licensed counselor that both parties can reasonably agree to, and Mr. Whitehead, since you are officially employed, you must pay at least 65% of these expenses. Dr. Jackie Trahan was an attractive woman in her early 30s. She had a firm handshake and looked Anthony and Cheyenne in the eyes as she addressed them. She listened intently, taking notes on a small pad, interrupting to clarify certain statements. She gave Cheyenne 25 minutes, then Anthony 25 minutes. She also admonished Cheyenne for interrupting Anthony. "Fine, next week, Anthony. We'll talk about your goals. What do you hope to get out of this?" Jackie asked. "Same thing," Cheyenne said. "What do you hope to get out of this?" Jackie asked again. "Are you an idiot?" Cheyenne said in surprise, her eyes widening. "I want our marriage back." Jackie suppressed a grin behind Cheyenne. Anthony shook his head in denial. "Okay, this is your main goal. Think about your secondary goal, tertiary goal." "I like her," Anthony commented as he and Cheyenne left the woman's office. "Oh, of course you like her," Cheyenne said. "She seduced you the whole session," she accused. "What?" Anthony was surprised, stopping at his car. "She seduced you the entire session while I was trying to talk," Cheyenne repeated. "Well, next time I'll take a look," Anthony promised. But there was no next time. A surprise visit by a court official to Cheyenne's home revealed illegal substances lying in plain sight on the coffee table. John Bootsy Borden was unhappy with his trial. He had already been replaced in Allison's bed and only made his situation worse by threatening Anthony Whitehead in front of the judge, prosecutor, and bailiff. "Keep talking, loser," Anthony chuckled. This, of course, provoked more threats and promises of revenge. What could have been a simple fine and probation turned into 40 months in a medium-security prison. John did not make it to the facility, however. He died of a massive heart attack 2 days after the trial. Anthony continued to experience difficulties at work at Whitehead Generators. Many employees did not accept him. He was a stranger who suddenly appeared and became their boss. Production began to fall slowly at first, but in recent weeks, it had virtually ground to a halt. Meetings with the heads of each department did not bring results. Each executive also did not accept Anthony's sudden appearance. Most of them had started at the bottom and worked their way up in their departments. They believed that Anthony should have started at the bottom and worked his way up through the ranks. Susan and Lisa couldn't help. They were, of course, concerned, but they had no applicable knowledge of what to do in such a situation. "Mom, I'm going to do something very, very drastic," Anthony finally said after receiving an angry call from an overseas company. "Do it," Susan said. "Do it," Lisa agreed. The next morning, there were 60 boxes of tornado donuts on the table. Each employee was invited to enjoy them, take 1, 6, or a dozen of the delicious treats. Large kettles boiled dark, rich coffee. There were also 2-gallon jugs of milk, whole and skim. Anthony poured himself a large cup of whole milk and dipped his vanilla tornado donut into it. Okay, Anthony said as the staff chatted, ate, and laughed. Heather, the production manager, called for quiet. "Mr. Whitehead wants to say something." "Thank you," Anthony said, drinking his milk and throwing the glass into a large trash can. He pointed to a large graph. It had colored stripes extending outwards. The red one showed last year's numbers as of this day. "Not bad, right?" he said. He let the whispers of agreement fall silent, then he pointed to the red stripe. "You know, they were good. You all got some pretty hefty bonuses in your Christmas stockings, right?" said Anthony. "Well, they were Christmas bonuses," Brent began. "Nonsense, pure nonsense," Anthony interrupted sharply. "They were issued 2 days before Christmas. These were Christmas bonuses. Does anyone hate that they're called a Christmas bonus? You can return this bonus to Whitehead Generators. Anyone want it back? No? Then I hope you all enjoyed these Christmas bonuses." So, as I was saying before political correctness came in, the numbers last year were good. The numbers this year are terrible. Anthony pointed to the blue stripe. The blue stripe was almost 3/4 the length of the red stripe. "Can anyone tell me why the blue band numbers are terrible?" Anthony asked. The silence was broken only by someone coughing. Anthony looked at the employees and the managers. They all looked back at him. "What changed?" What has changed between last year and this year? Has demand fallen? According to our sales, this is a big, hard no. Has product availability changed? Looking at our stock, that's a big fat no. Has the trucking industry stopped sending trucks to our loading docks? No. Have shipments to our customers stopped? No. So, what's changed? Anthony asked. There was silence again. Some employees looked down at the hard concrete floor. The only thing that has changed is the death of my father, and last I heard, he wasn't coming down here to help unload the trucks. He did not manage the parts manufacturing process. He did not switch cylinders. He didn't come down here for assembly. He didn't load the trucks. The man sat in his office and made sure that parts were ordered, bills were paid, and employees received salaries. And it's still going on. So what has changed? How exactly could Marcus Whitehead's death affect our production? Anthony continued after a long silence. He removed the bar graph and folded it, then threw it into the trash can. So, that's what's going to change, Anthony said. Or are the numbers returning to the level they should have been 6 weeks from today? 6 weeks later, he looked at his watch, 7:43. Either each of you, without exception, every last one of you, will be unemployed. Have questions? No? Go to work, Anthony finished. He turned around and walked up the metal steps to the office. Less than 4 weeks later, 27 days after the dust settled, Lisa reported to the board that production was back to normal. In fact, they were likely to exceed last year's numbers. I suggest giving them a bonus, Jimmy suggested. I suggest not, Anthony replied sharply. What? Lisa was surprised, amazed at her brother's harshness. A bonus for doing what they're supposed to do. If I hadn't gone down there and confronted them head-on, and let them know they were just days away from unemployment, we'd still be talking about how bad the numbers were and trying to figure out how to improve them, Anthony said. Then no bonuses. I'm not even sure I want to give them Christmas bonuses. There will be Christmas bonuses, said Susan. Even if I have to give up my share, our employees will receive their Christmas bonuses. I thought we shouldn't call them Christmas bonuses, Jimmy began. I am a Christian. Are you Christian? We are celebrating Christmas. It's a damn Christmas bonus. Each of them who is offended by the word Christmas has every right to refuse to receive their Christmas bonus. But I'll bet your life that neither of them will mind, Anthony replied sharply. You're betting on my life, huh? Not on yours, mine, Jimmy grinned. Are there any other new cases? Susan finally interrupted the brotherly squabble. Yeah, there's a new case about why Anthony is such a big jerk, Jimmy said. Then I propose adjourning the meeting, said Lisa. I support, Anthony agreed. Anthony continued to pay utilities and home insurance even as he looked for a new place to live. At first, he thought about moving closer to the plant, but he didn't like the areas around Pinocchio. It was even worse in Algae. Many of the houses were built 50 or 60 years ago and many looked as if they had not been painted in as many years. Susan's home was in a gated community next to Hardington Acres Golf Club. Anthony had a tag on his car's rearview mirror, and if he forgot or lost the tag, he also knew Susan's security code and could enter the code into the gate. Cheyenne didn't have a tag. Cheyenne had no code. Cheyenne was still behind bars, but they weren't going to keep her there forever. Carmen Davis was an attractive middle-aged woman. She had a firm handshake and a friendly, relaxed style. She also listened to her clients rather than trying to force them to listen to herself. This alone put her above the last two realtors Anthony worked with. Hardington, you usually have to wait for someone to die before you can get a house in this area, Carmen mused, but there is one on Pennington. Would you like to see it? Let's go, Anthony said. The house was 3 stories high with a deep chocolate brown brick exterior and honey brown wood surrounds. Even before seeing the interior, Anthony decided he wanted this house. The garage was located at the back, separate from the main house. It had 3 spaces for cars and a guest apartment above it. The garage was built from the same brick as the house, and the garage door was made from the same honey brown wood. Don't worry, Carmen said, getting out of the car. The house has been taken off the market. What? But there's a sign from Gold Standard right there, Anthony pointed out. No, I decided that I want this handsome man for myself, said Carmen. You rarely see garage doors like this. Well, since we're here, let's take a look at your new home, Miss Davis, Anthony chuckled. The first floor had a grand hall, a room clearly intended to be a library with honey-brown bookshelves built into 3 walls, and a large fireplace. The kitchen was spacious and had plenty of space to work. The dining room was a little small, but Carmen shrugged. The second floor contained 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The east side of the floor had 2 bedrooms separated by a shared bathroom, and the west side had the same configuration. Sure, one of these could be turned into a home office, Carmen suggested. Or I could shoot myself, Anthony said. Miss Davis, Carmen said, call me Carmen. Okay, Carmen. I come home to get away from work. Why should I bring it home with me? Asked Anthony. Fine, so no home office, Carmen said. These are really big bedrooms. Ready to see the 3rd floor? There were only 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor, but each was an apartment. Each bedroom had a fireplace, a large bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, an enclosed shower with a marble bench and 4 shower heads, and a vanity with 2 sinks. Each bedroom also had a large bay window with an upholstered bench. One window faced east, the window in the other apartment faced west. Like I said, it's a shame this house is off the market, Carmen said admiringly, looking at the closet. You could park a truck here, Anthony said, looking into the closet. Of course, my ex, she would find a way to fill it and end up without a place. My girls are not like that, Carmen smiled. But I have a feeling that my granddaughter, Carrie, is going to be a little princess, and princesses need a lot of clothes, don't they? How much did they ask for it? Anthony asked as they walked down the stairs. You know, before you got it for yourself. $475, Carmen answered. Offer them $490, Anthony said. We'll need a 1% deposit, Carmen said. Of course, Davis Real Estate, Anthony said, and used his phone to translate. Anthony was munching on a serving of ribs at Cowboy's Barbecue when Carmen sent him a message. The proposal was accepted. He wiped his hands but still got sauce on his phone. He told her to arrange for the deal to close as soon as possible. Carter, Anthony, and Cheyenne's lawyer were back in Judge Stott's office. Following Carter's petition and minimal token resistance from Cheyenne's lawyer, Judge Stott agreed that because Mrs. Whitehead could not attend the counseling sessions, the order for 8 mandatory sessions was vacated. That's why I pay you big money, Anthony exclaimed. With the lifting of the consultation order, Carter continued, the issue remains regarding Mr. Whitehead's petition for divorce. Mrs. Whitehead does not agree with this petition, Cheyenne's lawyer pleaded. Judge Stott contacted the street and parish clerk of court, who confirmed that Mrs. Whitehead's upcoming trial would take place in 4 months. With this information, Judge Stott refused to proceed with the divorce petition. We honor, Carter said. It's okay, Anthony sighed. Really, the only reason to get a divorce is to get married again, and I have a feeling it will be a long time before I make that mistake again. Yeah, get rid of the one crazy woman who resists divorce until the end. Finally decide to hell with it, we're just making the lawyers rich. So, give it all up, then. Just as you know you're in Burns doing a little shopping, you see this stuffy redhead, the cutest little redhead girl with her, says, Hi, mister. What are you doing? And now you're in love and you just need to be with this woman, Carter said. I have a feeling you're not making this up, Anthony said. He smiled wider as Carter raised his left hand, showing his wedding ring. Carter also smiled as he admitted that he was the coach of his stepdaughter's soccer team. Oh, that's good. Maybe one day she'll want to play a real sport, Anthony suggested. Yeah, I'd love to see her pale 5th spot trying to keep up with a bunch of 7-year-olds who all think they're the next David Beckham, Carter smiled. Cheyenne was fined $110,000 and placed on probation for 3 years with a stern warning that if she failed the test again, she would spend 3 years in a medium-security prison. She no longer had Anthony's phone number, so she called Whitehead Generators. Courtney Louvier, the personal assistant Marcus had trained, contacted Anthony to tell him that his wife was on line 3. Hey, Cheyenne, what a nasty surprise, Anthony said. I called your old office. That ugly thing, DeFranco or something, said you weren't there anymore, Cheyenne snapped. DeFranco? Anthony said. What? Cheyenne asked. Her name is DeFranco, Anthony said. And, Cheyenne, where have you been? What? I was in jail. Cheyenne squealed. I took over my father's business, remember? Anthony continued, drowning out her indignant muttering. That happened before you went back to prison. How am I supposed to remember all this nonsense? Cheyenne asked, and, what's all this nonsense? We don't have to go to counseling anymore, Anthony said. You've been unavailable, but hey, now that you're free, we can move forward with the divorce. Really? Why? Cheyenne asked, her voice shaking. Anthony listened to her cry for a moment. It really hurt listening to her cry. He felt her tears were sincere. She didn't try to manipulate him or get her way. Cheyenne, why? Why in God's name do you want to stay married? Anthony asked. What? What are you saying? Cheyenne sobbed. I love you. That's enough, Anthony said. Just stop and think about it for a minute, Cheyenne. Honestly, I have no doubt that you can love me, but honestly, you don't love me at all. It's not like that. Cheyenne sobbed. What? What exactly do you like about me, Cheyenne? Because all I remember is endless nagging, constant nagging, endless complaining. Please, Cheyenne, just sign the papers. Just give me a divorce. You don't even want to try. Cheyenne sobbed. Please, Cheyenne, please just listen. Anthony sighed. Over the past few months, I've had this same pain at work, but then I go home and it's like, I can breathe. So what, you can breathe here? Cheyenne said, her voice filled with bitterness. No, I can't. I can't and I won't. I'm not going to put myself through one more minute of suffering than is absolutely necessary, Anthony said. I will fight for a divorce. Cheyenne now screamed, do you hear that? I'll fight for this as long as it takes. When Carter FIV informed Cheyenne's attorney that all additional expenses would be paid by Cheyenne Whitehead, the attorney contacted Cheyenne and relayed this information to her. Oh, so now you're using Dad's money against me? Cheyenne said sarcastically into the phone. Now you have money. Should I do whatever you say? Yes, said Anthony, making no attempt to respond to her attack. I hope you rot in hell, Anthony Whitehead, Cheyenne spat. Yeah, I'm getting ready to get out, but thanks for the good wishes, Anthony joked. I'll hang up now. Anthony knew when Cheyenne received the final divorce decree. Courtney Louvier contacted him to let him know that Cheyenne Whitehead was on line 3. Before Anthony could even say hi, Cheyenne was already sobbing into the phone. Arriving home after another grueling day, Anthony pulled out a rather thick envelope with the official seal of the St. Anne County Court. The letter lay on the kitchen table, and he did not open it for several long minutes. Anthony wished he had something stronger than beer at home. He even got into his Ferrari with the intention of driving to the nearest store in Pinocchio, Louisiana, the only place other than the club where he could buy a bottle of St. Elizabeth's Superior. Instead, he ended up at Arthur Porter's gym. He hit the heavy bag until he could no longer raise his arms, then stood under the hot shower, listlessly rubbing his body with soap. Home again with damp hair and smelling of cheap soap, Anthony looked at the countertop. The envelope was still there. 14, almost 15 years of marriage were over. There were no whistles or applause, only screams and tears and then dead silence, broken only by the rustle of thick papers in his hands. Anthony allowed a tear to roll down his cheek as he read the cold, impersonal legal terms that declared that Anthony Marcus Whitehead and Cheyenne Allison Frick Whitehead were no longer legally married. They had no legal rights to each other. Lisa, his sister, quietly sympathized. Gracie, his niece, assured him that he would meet someone better. Susan was too well-mannered to say, thank God. When Anthony called her, she simply quietly assured him that it would be better this way. Jimmy, Cindy, and Barbara, his other siblings, wondered why he was calling them to tell them about the dissolution of his marriage. Damn, I thought you two got divorced a long time ago. What, 5 or 6 years ago? Cindy asked. At least once a day during the work week, Anthony received a call from Cheyenne. Apparently, she couldn't or wouldn't accept the fact that they were actually divorced. Over time, the calls became less frequent, first every other day, then once a week, once a month, and then from time to time. Suddenly, I found someone, Cheyenne said on Christmas Eve. Oh, well, good for you, Anthony said, looking at the bright red envelope his mother had just placed on his desk. Twice as good as you've ever been, Cheyenne quipped into the phone. Oh, I'm sure it is, said Anthony, now seeing the conversation for what it really was. Cheyenne was just trying to make him jealous. The problem was that Anthony didn't feel jealous. Yes, I have, Cheyenne began. Well, that's great, Cheyenne, Anthony said cheerfully. I hope you in. Sorry, you didn't say his name, but I hope you have a very Merry Christmas too. Inside the bright red envelope was his Christmas bonus. Anthony whistled as he looked at the $250,000 amount on the check. Then he smiled and nodded. Under this envelope was another envelope, a postcard from DeFranco, his former colleague. Although almost 2 years had passed, she still remembered to send him a postcard. The postcard showed a horse-faced woman and her 3 children all sitting on horses. Anthony smiled at the genuine happiness they were radiating. Merry Christmas, and wrote. As you can see, we enjoyed the ranch so much that we saved up and went there again this year. Merry Christmas, Anthony said out loud, reading the little notes her 3 children had scribbled on the inside cover of the card. Before leaving his office, Anthony called Oakleaf Ranch and booked a 2-week cattle camp for Ann and her children. He then booked the same trip for Cheyenne and a guest. He was pretty sure Cheyenne wouldn't go, and if she did, she would take her mother with her, not some mysterious new lover. Mr. Whitehead, is this bonus? Courtney asked, a worried look on her face. Yes, miss, Anthony smiled. Are you going to say that's too much, Mr. Whitehead? Courtney objected. Mr. Whitehead, I haven't been doing anything all day, Courtney said. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, hug a tree, whatever you're celebrating. See you Monday, okay? Okay, Anthony said and left. The work floor was unusually quiet as his leather heels clicked on the concrete. In the corner by the metal steps stood a festively decorated Christmas tree. Underneath were 3 gifts, 2 of them looked slightly dented as if they had been touched often, while the 3rd gift looked almost untouched. Anthony saw his name on the tag and again refused to even pick up the colorfully wrapped gift. Yeah, no. I think I'll leave this one alone, Anthony chuckled mirthlessly. The day after Christmas, Anthony bought himself a Bentley. The shiny white car was as responsive as his Ferrari, but it felt like he was sitting on a cloud. Even the speed bumps in the Whitehead Generator's parking lot were barely noticeable as he drove over them. Wow, that's a luxury feeling, Anthony said as he pulled into his parking spot. The new year was celebrated at the Hardington Acres Club. Anthony put a smile on his face as he interacted with family and guests. The orchestra was quite good, and he even danced a few times with Gracie, his favorite niece, as well as with Lisa, Cindy, Barbara, and Cindy's daughters Penny and Stacy. Honestly, if he could avoid dancing with those 2 nieces, he would. Penny and Stacy were spitting images of Cindy Whitehead, narcissistic, spoiled princesses. At midnight, he stood with his mother and family, counted down the time, and then shouted Happy New Year along with everyone else. He looked around but didn't see Gracie. This was not unusual, the girl usually avoided crowds. Happy New Year, Anthony said when he found Gracie standing on the back porch, her nose pressed against the cold glass as she watched the impressive fireworks display. The beautiful young woman looked away from the fireworks and smiled. He let her come to him, hug him, and give him a quick kiss on the cheek. Happy New Year, Uncle Anthony, Gracie said, getting ready to go. Are you okay? Asked Anthony. Yeah, Gracie agreed. Happy New Year, Anthony said again, standing at the door that led to the magnificent ballroom. This year will be better, Uncle Anthony, Gracie whispered quietly with hope. Now, 364 days later, Anthony Whitehead thought nothing of his niece's empty words. Anthony only felt fatigue creeping into his body. I need a vacation, Anthony realized. I sit at my desk every damn day and approve vacations for everyone else. I need my vacation. Sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the numbers and quotas, Anthony couldn't think of any vacation plans. The ranch was not an option for him. He didn't like horses. To him, horses smelled bad. The thought of fishing in a mountain stream reminded him of mosquitoes and cold water, which was not at all attractive. The same applied to alpine skiing. Skis meant snow, and snow meant cold. The French Quarter made Anthony think of crowds, pushing, pulling, sweaty people rubbing against each other. Cruises didn't appeal to him either. Anthony's mother went on cruises, and he didn't know why. All Susan Whitehead could talk about were buffets and how much weight she needed to lose after supposedly gaining 20 mythical pounds on her last cruise. Amusement parks were hot and sweaty. Immediately after the tragedy, Anthony and Cheyenne took Gracie and Lisa to Disneyland in Florida. 6 days of a nearly catatonic child and a crying mother was as horrific an experience as any other ordeal Anthony had ever endured. Every moment, his heart broke over and over again for this sweet, scared child. After the ordeal ended mercifully, Gracie hugged his knees and whispered, "Thank you, Uncle Anthony." That one hug made every miserable, sweaty, uncomfortable moment worth it. For that one hug on the knees, Anthony would happily relive it all again. But his niece was no longer that little child. "Thank you, Father," Anthony said privately in the quiet office. "Thanks for the whole damn bunch, you sneaky scoundrel." At 3:46 p.m., Brent knocked on the door and announced that the last time sheets were ready. "Thank you, Mr. Sayre," Anthony said, not looking up from the table with shipping rates. Anthony collected the time sheets, entered each employee's hours, adding 2 hours each to bring it up to a full 40 hours for the week. He double-checked each report card and then signed each one as Anthony M. Whitehead. Before turning everything off, Anthony walked through the semi-darkness of the workshop and looked around again. The Christmas tree was twinkling and blinking, looking rather sad in the corner. There were 2 gifts underneath, one for an employee who was on vacation, the other addressed to Anthony W. Again, Anthony refused to even pick up the colorfully wrapped gift. Anthony entered the code for the alarm. With one last look at the building, he walked out into the cold December wind. Arthur Porter's son, Jake Porter, was on duty and nodded in greeting as Anthony entered the gym. Anthony beat the heavy bag and then tried his hand at the speed bag. "We need to do this faster," the young man said mockingly. Anthony ignored the young man and continued hitting the leather bag, slowly and methodically. He increased his speed. He would never be as fast as the young man, and his bag would never make the sound RTT, but he found a good rhythm. Arriving at the club, Anthony smiled as his niece's green Mustang pulled up right behind him. They drove up slowly, and finally, Anthony braced himself for the cold. "Happy New Year, sir," the parking attendant said cheerfully, handing Anthony a receipt. His niece, Gracie, got out from the passenger side, and Anthony smiled warmly. His eyebrow raised slightly as an attractive brunette stepped out of the driver's side. He was introduced to Nancy Hebert, Gracie's friend. Before he could stop himself, Anthony asked what they meant by girlfriend. "We're in this together," Nancy said without hesitation. In the club lobby, Anthony watched as Gracie's friend helped her. He saw the beautiful girl unbutton Gracie's coat, take their coats to the closet, and then take Gracie's hand. "Thank you," God said Anthony to himself. "Someone to take care of her." The young girl at the wardrobe reception gave Anthony a beautiful smile. Her big brown eyes sparkled, and her plump lips stretched to reveal one slightly crooked tooth as she wished him a Happy New Year. Inside the ballroom, Anthony saw his mother talking with Joanna and Barney Seal. He didn't see their annoying daughter Barbara and walked over to the trio. As if she felt she had been missed, Barbara walked up to the trio right in front of Anthony. "Mom, where's your walker?" Anthony joked. "Anthony Marcus Whitehead." Susan screamed. "Hi, Anthony," Barbara Seal flirted. "Oh, hi, Betty," said Anthony. Susan told Anthony that Cheyenne was here and, in fact, she was heading towards them. She also noted that she had no idea what Anthony had ever seen in this impudent woman. "I saw a lot of myself in her," Anthony said jokingly. Encouraging, Susan declared as she left. "Hey, Anthony," Cheyenne grinned, bending over so her large breasts and rose tattoo were clearly visible. "Hi, Cheyenne," Anthony said. "So, where is he?" "Oh, what's his name?" Cheyenne suggested, clearly drunk. "Roland." Cheyenne slurred her words and staggered on her 5-inch heels. Even though Cheyenne was bragging about her 24-year-old boyfriend, Anthony could feel her unhappiness coming off her in waves. He felt depressed talking to her. He felt no jealousy towards Cheyenne or Roland, her young lover. Anthony felt sorry for her and felt some responsibility for her misfortune. "Well, Happy New Year," Anthony said as Roland Verdit approached them. The young man's face was gloomy, and his unsteady gait told Anthony that Cheyenne wasn't the only one who had gotten too carried away with the champagne that evening. "Roland, how are you?" Anthony put a smile on his face and extended his hand. "Cheyenne was just telling me how happy you two are together." "Oh, yeah," Roland said, putting his arm around Cheyenne's waist. The gesture nearly dropped them both to the ground. Anthony supported Roland, preventing a minor embarrassment for the couple. "Oh yes," she said. "You're twice as good as me." "So, what can I say, huh?" Anthony said good-naturedly. "You know, I could never make Cheyenne happy, so if you can, just go ahead. More power to you." The group was a quintet with an emaciated female vocalist. They were good and performed a variety of dance songs. Anthony danced with his nieces Penny and Stacy, his sisters Cindy, Barbara, and Lisa, and his mother. However, Gracie seemed happy to be dancing on the dance floor with her friend. For several dances, Anthony simply stood and watched the two young women smiling at each other as they swayed to the music. His younger brother Jimmy had approached Lisa. Jimmy demanded a conversation with Gracie and an opportunity to make amends in his relationship with her. There was a row, and an angry Lisa hit Jimmy, knocking him to the ground. Before Anthony could intervene, Susan Whitehead quietly but firmly ordered Jimmy to leave. Anthony sat at the table, shaking his head. Gracie, deeply upset, allowed herself to be led to the table by Nancy. Anthony's heart almost broke when he saw how the girl consoled and cared for his niece. Again, he silently thanked God that Nancy Hebert was in Gracie's life. After 2 glasses of water, Nancy pulled Gracie back onto the dance floor. Anthony and Lisa exchanged smiles as they watched the two young women dance. "Come on, Mom, let's dance," Anthony demanded, taking Susan's hand. Although he had not planned it, Anthony was one of the last to leave the ballroom. He hadn't seen Roland or Cheyenne since their last meeting and assumed they had either been placed in a secluded corner to pass out or had been discreetly asked to leave. Anthony still wondered why Cheyenne continued to be a member of the club. She had always despised it when they were married. He also wondered how she paid for her membership. The girl's smile at the wardrobe reception was forced. The smile didn't reach her big brown eyes. When Anthony asked what had happened, the story poured out. Her boyfriend had taken her car while she was at work. She had to finish her shift soon, but the guy wasn't answering her calls or texts. Anthony invited the girl to use his phone, suggesting that this guy was ignoring his girlfriend's calls. The assumption turned out to be correct. Trey Edmonton answered the third call using his best ghetto voice. Anthony informed Trey Edmonton that he and his team would get the girl home safe. The wardrobe girl's eyes widened in surprise when Anthony ended the call. Anthony smiled as his phone started ringing. He sent the call to voicemail, telling the girl that her boyfriend seemed to be quite drunk. When her own phone started ringing, Anthony offered to take her home. The trip from the club to the girl's apartment took 24 minutes. During the trip, Anthony learned that Nessie, that was the girl's name, lived with her mother, stepfather, and 2 stepsisters in a 2-room apartment. Nessie was short for Vanessa. In her cheap jacket and branded polo shirt and polyester trousers hugging her attractive figure, Anthony decided that Nessie was not just any girl, she was Vanessa. At her apartment, Vanessa demanded Anthony's phone number. She entered her number into his phone, which greatly amused Anthony. As she gently released his lips, Vanessa gave a soft bite to his bottom lip with her teeth. On his way home, Anthony passed a compact car that was stopped by a St. Parish police car. A sullen young man sat in the back of the cruiser, and Anthony wondered if this was Nessie's ex-boyfriend. Apparently, this was Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, as she now spoke of him. Anthony didn't weaken until he pulled into his garage. At 11 minutes past midnight, Anthony's phone rang. He saw Vanessa's name and briefly considered setting the girl's ringtone to Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison. "Hello," she greeted cheerfully when he answered. "Hello," Anthony replied. "Hey, me. Listen, what are you doing for dinner?" "My mom makes New Year's stuff, you know, ham, black-eyed peas, and cabbage." No, it's not that nasty cabbage. My mom really makes the best cabbage. She fries it with a pound of bacon. It's so delicious. And applesauce. Will you come?" Vanessa quickly said. Vanessa, do you know how old I am?" asked Anthony. "No, not really," Vanessa replied. "Honey, I'll be 42 on February 27th, Anthony admitted. "Oh, so what? 42-year-olds don't eat?" Vanessa asked. We eat more than we should most of the time," Anthony laughed. "Okay then, lunch will be at 1, Vanessa said. Anthony shrugged. He had no plans for lunch, and cabbage cooked with a pound of bacon sounded delicious. He decided that he would go, thank Vanessa and her mother for their hospitality, and then leave. Burns & Burns grocery store was open. The list on his phone mentioned wines that would go with ham, and Anthony scanned the shelves looking for any of the wines listed. He found one and took it. Turning around, he also found some Elizabeth Lager and bought a 6-pack. Rounding the corner, going in the wrong direction, Anthony came face to face with the baker as the woman was putting hot loaves of French bread on the counter. "Perfect timing!" Anthony exclaimed, causing the curvaceous woman to laugh. Walking down the aisle next to the wine bar, Anthony saw neatly arranged bouquets of fresh flowers. "Do grocery stores sell flowers?" Anthony asked out loud. "For Valentine's Day, you won't find a better deal," a young store employee assured Anthony. "Those flower shops will charge you $20-30. It's $4.99 here." "Yeah," said Anthony. He carried the beer, wine, and bread to the open cash register. Then he returned to the flower aisle and took 2 vases, already arranged. One was a mixture of different flowers, and the other was a collection of white roses. The exhausted woman smiled when Anthony returned with the 2 vases. "I think so," Anthony agreed. "Oh, they're beautiful." "2? Will anyone be jealous?" the woman asked, carefully scanning the vases. "There might even be a shooting," Anthony said. "Remember, keep your head down." The woman chuckled. "Yeah, where were you when I was getting divorced?" she asked, and Anthony laughed. In the car, Anthony made sure to cut the price tags off the bouquets. He then placed the 2 vases on the floor of the front seat of his Ferrari and drove to the apartment complex. "Hello!" Vanessa exclaimed joyfully, opening the apartment door. "Hi," Anthony said, handing her a vase of white roses. "This is for you." Vanessa's brother was almost an exact copy of Natalie Arnold, her mother, the same blonde hair, the same brown eyes, the same big breasts, the same round buttocks, and the same smile. Natalie's handshake was warm as she greeted Anthony, but then she scolded him for bringing wine, beer, and bread. "And look what he brought me," Vanessa boasted, showing her mother the vase of roses. "Man, wow, they're beautiful," Natalie said, reaching out to gently touch one of the rose petals. "I'll be right back," Anthony said. "Oh, you shouldn't have done that," Natalie countered when Anthony returned a moment later with another vase of flowers. "Are you feeding me?" "Oh yeah, I should have done that," Anthony replied. "Clarissa, Bunny, this is Tony," Vanessa introduced Anthony to the 2 rather plump girls. "Anthony," he smiled. No, I'll call you Tony," Vanessa smiled and kissed him. "Bunny, go tell Daddy that dinner is almost ready," Natalie ordered the younger girl. "Yes, Mom," Bunny said and ran down the corridor. Anthony was sure that the neighbors below Arno's apartment didn't like it when Bunny ran around. The sound was quite loud. "Hi, I'm Frank. How are you?" Frank said, trying to push Vanessa away to get to Bunny. "Anthony Whitehead," Anthony smiled as Frank grabbed the girl's chubby hand. "Dad, don't!" Bunny screamed as her father picked her up. "What did I tell you, huh?" Frank said, giving the girl 2 slaps on her plump buttocks and then a loud kiss on the cheek. "Hi, Anthony. How are you?" Frank said, holding out a meaty hand. "I'm okay. What about you? How are you?" Anthony said, shaking the man's hand. Lunch was a celebration. It was loud, cheerful, and energetic. The wine was shared among all 6 of us, even Bunny and Clarissa, who tried a glass each, grimacing at the taste and quickly rinsing their mouths with sweet tea. "And now, a beer," Frank said when Natalie mentioned St. Elizabeth Lager, which Anthony had brought along with the wine and bread. "Okay," Vanessa agreed. "Oh, and we'll have banana pudding, Anthony. Do you like banana pudding?" Natalie asked. "Damn it, who doesn't like banana pudding?" Anthony agreed. Over banana pudding and coffee, Anthony was told about Vanessa's early days. He was even shown photographs of her as a cute child. He also learned about Frank's ex-wife, Bunny, and Clarissa's mother, who had just left them. "Coming home, oh damn, I'm almost tired," Frank said. "Been on my feet all day." "What are you doing?" asked Anthony. "Mr. Tony, my dad is a mailman," Bunny said proudly. "Tony?" thought Anthony. "You said it was Anthony," Natalie asked. "Looks like Vanessa decided it would be Tony," Anthony smiled. His smile widened as Vanessa squeezed his hand. She laid her head on his shoulder. "Anyway, when I get home," this little one says, "Oh, Daddy, I'm going to starve, right?" And this one, "God, when was the last time this diaper was changed, huh?" Frank continued his story. "I'm right next door, man. Those apartments were small, huh?" Natalie smiled, remembering. "Yes, they were," Frank agreed. "And this one is getting smaller." "What do you mean?" Vanessa asked, lifting her head from Anthony's shoulder. "So, you're about to have another little brother or sister, about 5 or 6 months old by the looks of it," Frank boasted. "No!" Vanessa exclaimed, then screamed. Somehow, dinner moved from the small dining room to the living room. Anthony was wedged in the corner of the small sofa with Vanessa cuddled up to him. When Anthony admitted that he was the COO of Whitehead Generators, Frank's only comment was that he knew where it was but that it wasn't on his route. "I think it's Sharon who services this whole block," Frank mused. For some reason, Anthony felt he had to reduce his importance. He should be more like this family. So, he told them about his work for St. Parish before his father's death, civil engineering. "Yeah, remember?" Frank said, then looked at Anthony. "But dude, were you sick or something? Damn, you lost a ton of weight." When Anthony finally said goodbye. When he took his long coat off the hook, Vanessa put her coat on too. "Where are we going?" asked Anthony. "I was going to ask you about that." She smiled and grabbed his hand. "You know what? I haven't been to a movie and I don't remember when," Vanessa said. Anthony decided to stand outside the Joy 4 movie theater in Elk, Louisiana. Anthony and Vanessa huddled together, trying to get shelter from the harsh wind blowing off the bayou. Apparently, they weren't the only ones who decided to go to the movies. In front of them stood a line of almost 40 people wanting to buy tickets, and among the 3 people in front of them, Anthony saw a familiar face. The young man Cheyenne Whitehead was clinging to his knot Roland. Oblivious to those around them, the two kissed and shamelessly groped each other. At first, Anthony was outraged by his ex-wife's behavior. Then a sober thought came over him. Quite often during their marriage, Cheyenne would say she was going somewhere but then end up not where she said she would be. Other times, she was unavailable altogether and didn't say where she was. What did Cheyenne do when he couldn't find her? She always had plausible excuses for these periods or reacted very defensively. "You don't own me" was her favorite defense. But now, as he observed his ex-wife's behavior, Anthony wondered if this behavior had been the norm while they were married. "Oh, Vanessa," Vanessa shuddered as a gust of icy wind swept across the asphalt parking lot. Anthony smiled and pulled the girl towards him, kissing Vanessa on the nose. Someone standing between Anthony and Cheyenne apparently said something to the loving couple. Cheyenne turned to answer. As she did, she saw Anthony, and her arrogant expression turned into fear. Anthony smiled and nodded in recognition. Cheyenne's face changed again, taking on a mock expression. "Is this one of Gracie's little friends?" Cheyenne said mockingly, pointing her red fingernail at Vanessa. No. This is my girlfriend, Vanessa bro, Anthony smiled. Vanessa, this is Cheyenne Whitehead, my ex-wife. And excuse me, young man, I don't know your name. This is Tim, the young man stammered. Hi, Tim, Anthony said cheerfully. So, where's Roland? Too drunk, Cheyenne said, turning away from Anthony and Vanessa. The line moved slowly. Right before they reached the window, Anthony asked Vanessa what movie they were going to watch. She seemed surprised that she was allowed to choose. Inside, Anthony stood behind Cheyenne and Tim in the snack line. Tony, I can take, Vanessa began, looking around at the illuminated menu. Honey, you can take whatever you want, Anthony smiled. So, Tony? Cheyenne screamed, eyes wide in surprise as she turned to face them. The line is moving, Anthony smiled, nodding his head. You almost hit me that time, Cheyenne said. I don't remember that, Anthony said, shrugging. But maybe I didn't care about you as much as I care about Vanessa back then, huh? Ah, Tony, Vanessa exclaimed, hugging Anthony tightly. Don't worry, baby, Cheyenne told Vanessa mockingly. Once the glitter wears off, he'll throw you away like toilet paper. Only if it acts like toilet paper, Anthony said. The line is moving. Maybe you should come over. Why don't you go to hell? Cheyenne said angrily. After the movie, Anthony reluctantly told Vanessa that the next day was a workday and he needed to catch up. From Vanessa's apartment complex, Anthony drove home to his mother. Luckily, she had already prepared coffee. Sitting at the kitchen bar, Anthony told Susan about meeting Cheyenne at the Joy 4 movie theater. Was Susan's only response. And so I'm standing there thinking, did she cheat on me? How is she doing it now with Roland? Anthony said. I think it's all water under the bridge now, but no. Well, at least for the first 2 years after your wedding, Susan revealed. What? How do you know that? Asked Anthony. Susan pushed her coffee cup towards him and then moved away from the counter. Anthony poured himself more coffee and topped it up for his mother. He made sure to turn off the coffee maker. Do you need to make some more coffee? Susan asked, returning to the kitchen with a plastic folder. No, Mom. Plus, I thought caffeine was bad for you old people, you know, urinary tract infections and all that, Anthony joked. Anthony Marcus Whitehead. Susan screamed, slamming him with the plastic folder. I just don't know what I ever did to deserve a child like you. The plastic folder was from a private investigator named Reynolds. Reynolds was hired by Marcus Whitehead, Anthony's father, to spy on Cheyenne Allison Frick Whitehead. The surveillance continued for 27 months before Marcus stopped it. She was a drinker who seemed to be addicted to spending your money on frivolous things. But no, she didn't cheat on you, Susan concluded. Oh, trust me, if she cheated, we'd be more than happy to let you know. In fact, I had to talk your dad into not calling the police because of her lifestyle. How did you do that? Anthony asked, flipping through the report. The 70s were pretty turbulent, Susan said. And Dad agreed with this. Anthony asked, closing the folder, your father loved you. Anthony, it may not have looked like it, but he loved you, Susan said. Are you sure you don't want more coffee? The next morning, Anthony did a grueling workout at Arthur Porter's gym. After a quick massage from Randy, the massage therapist, and a quick shower, Anthony was ready for the first day of work of the new year. As he pulled up to WHAD generators, Anthony nodded in satisfaction. The employee parking lot was nearly full, which meant only a few people had called in sick on this first day of work. Gathering his courage, Anthony opened the door of his Bentley and stepped out into the frosty January wind. Mr. Kazan, Collier, to my office, Anthony said as he walked through the workshop to the metal steps leading to the offices. Yes, sir, Brent Collier said, grinning, using an intonation that sounded more like, your heel, sir. Oh no. Don't sit down, Anthony said as Brent was about to sit down in one of the chairs in front of the table. It doesn't take a lot of time. Yes, sir, Brent asked in his strange intonation, grinning again at Anthony Whitehead. Mr. Collier, there will be some changes this year, Anthony began, and Brent tried to sit up again. and the first thing on the agenda is your dismissal." "You, dismissal?" Brent asked, his eyes widening in surprise. "Dismissed," Anthony said. "I will no longer tolerate your grin, your disdain, and your outright insubordination." Anthony smiled widely. "So Mr. French here will escort you to your locker and then escort you off-site." You can't be serious," Brent said, stuttering. "Oh, I'm serious, sir." "I'm deadly serious," Anthony said with a smile. "Thank you, that's all." But your dad promised me," Brent began. "Oh, I looked at your employment record. There was no mention of that promise. If you can produce a letter, email, or note from my father promising you that you can't be fired, then I'll reconsider." "No, that's it." "Thank you," said Anthony, already moving on to more pressing matters. "Good luck with the plan," Brent said sarcastically. "These guys, they're loyal to me. You hear? These guys are loyal to their paychecks, loyal to their families," Anthony said. "Mr. Turo, now please leave my office," Anthony said. Morning, Tony appeared on his cell phone screen, and Anthony smiled. "Good morning," Anthony replied. "Are you bored?" Vanessa asked. Anthony thought about her question, and his smile widened. In the cinema, her kisses were sensual. That first kiss at the beginning of the new year, when he dropped her off at her apartment, was no accident. She made him buy a huge buttered popcorn and a box of snow caps, then she mixed popcorn and chocolates. "Yes, I miss you," he replied. "Good morning, Mr. Whitehead." "How was your new year?" asked Courtney Louvier. "Incredible, just incredible," Anthony said, looking at his phone. "And yours?" Courtney began, shocked by Mr. Whitehead's vulgarity. Anthony looked at Vanessa's slender neck and wondered what a diamond necklace would look like on her. "I have one thing to do," Anthony suddenly decided, grabbing his coat. Anthony asked Vanessa if she was working that day, and she replied that she had a shift from 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She was desperately trying to arrange a ride with one of her colleagues. Her car was impounded when her ex-boyfriend was pulled over for drunk driving. "I'll take you," Anthony wrote. "Hooray!" Vanessa replied with a row of smiling faces and kisses. At 11 o'clock, Bunny opened the apartment door and greeted Mr. Tony with a hug. Clarissa also greeted Mr. Tony with a hug, as did Natalie. Vanessa greeted Tony with a hug and a kiss. Tony then had to hug everyone goodbye before they could leave the small, neat, warm apartment. They went to Dusty's Country Kitchen for lunch and then to Hardington Acres Country Club. Vanessa smiled as she leaned in to kiss Anthony. You sent me this photo and I was like, you know what this neck needs?" Anthony began, stuttering as he dug into his coat pocket. "My neck?" Vanessa laughed. "Were you really looking at my neck?" Vanessa asked. "So I bought you this," Anthony said, pulling out a thin box. Oh, Vanessa was amazed, looking at the thick gold necklace with 3 diamonds in the center. "Tony, this is real, right?" Vanessa asked, looking at him instead of the decoration. "Of course it's real," Anthony laughed. "What do you think?" "I would risk dyeing your neck green." "Okay, so what does that mean?" Vanessa asked, pointing to the decoration. "It means you, Vanessa. It means I like you. It means I'm glad we met." "It probably means I'm your boyfriend," Anthony said, stuttering. "You're already my boyfriend," Vanessa said. "Give me a kiss," Anthony demanded. "You'll be late." Vanessa screamed, struggling with the door. "What time do you finish?" Anthony shouted before she slammed the door. "I'll write to you," Vanessa promised. Anthony returned to work. Physically, he was at work, but mentally, he was in a dark cinema with a beautiful girl in his mind. He was in a luxury Bentley where a beautiful girl was giving him sweet, sensual kisses. "The Department of Labor is on line 3, Courtney told him. Anthony processed the request and saw line 2 blinking. When he ended the call, Courtney informed him that there were 2 Cheyennes on the line. "I don't think you're going to tell Roland about, my friendship with Tim, okay?" Cheyenne threatened. "Cheyenne, why would I want to interfere with his misfortune?" Anthony asked cheerfully. Poor guy, stuck with a lying, cheating fool. Why would I want to ruin that for him? Before Cheyenne could answer, Anthony hung up. At 5:30, Courtney wished him a good evening. At 6:30, Anthony walked through the darkened, quiet factory. He considered the possibility of adding a second shift. Every moment of plant downtime cost them money. The insurance was the same whether the plant was busy or not. Increased cleaning and maintenance would be minimal. Labor costs would increase slightly, but the increase in productivity would offset this. At 9:50, his phone beeped. A message from Vanessa informed him that she would finish in 10 minutes. Anthony pulled on his tennis shoes and grabbed his coat before running outside. "Hello," Vanessa said, opening the car door before Anthony could get out to open it for her. "Hey, you need this Saturday off?" Anthony asked. "I think I'm free." "It seems like Friday is my last day at work," Vanessa said with some sadness. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry to hear that," Anthony tried to sound sincere. On Saturday, at his niece Gracie's birthday party, Vanessa called him Tony. 7 of the 8 women at the event even screamed in surprise. "Nobody calls me Tony," Anthony smiled, kissing the tip of Vanessa's nose. "I call you that," she laughed, then made him recoil as she licked the tip of his nose. As they got into his Bentley, something Vanessa stated she preferred over another car, she again played with the thick gold necklace around her neck. Then she looked at him with her big, warm, beautiful brown eyes and quietly asked him to take her to his home. Her big eyes were full of fear as she looked at him, moving to shield her body from his gaze. She was self-conscious, convinced that her body was somehow fat or imperfect. "Vanessa, you're beautiful," Anthony breathed, crawling onto the bed next to her. The only thing she was wearing, besides the horrified expression on her face, was his thick gold necklace. To calm her anxiety, Anthony turned off the desk lamp. Now the light in the room came from the bay window. The pale winter light showed Anthony that the worry had not left her face, even as its shadow fell across her features. "Beautiful," Anthony repeated and kissed her softly. "I love you," Vanessa said in his ear. "Do you hear that, Tony? I love you." "Love you too," Anthony said. At the end of the month, they held their first board meeting to start the new year. Susan, the acting chief executive officer, and Lisa, the chief financial officer, wanted to conduct a study on the feasibility of adding a second shift to production. Anthony felt angry. Why study, he wondered, but he was outvoted, even though he had Cindy and Barbara's votes by proxy. Susan, Lisa, Jimmy, and Lisa, as Gracie's proxy, voted to wait until the study was done. After the meeting ended, only Susan and Anthony remained in the boardroom. Susan pulled a folder from her bag and smiled, pushing it toward Anthony. "Vanessa and Amber's file," she said. "Did you investigate her?" Anthony asked, feeling his anger rising. "Mom, this is incredible." "Of course I investigated her," Susan said. "Even you have to admit that your relationships with women are not the best." "I also investigated Gracie's friend," Susan defended herself. "Oh, and in case you were wondering, Nancy is fine. So if I tell you that Vanessa has a high school diploma, is it okay if I continue dating her?" "Please do, Tony," Susan said, the corners of her lips turning up slightly. "And, son, if there's another woman after Miss Amber, rest assured I'll investigate her too. The same goes for any girl Jimmy ever dates." Anthony pushed the file toward his mother and stood up. "Good night, Mom," he said. "Wait, just wait until you have kids of your own," Susan said, putting the folder back in her bag. Spring had replaced the frosty winter. In April, at his niece's wedding to her friend, Anthony was excited and felt honored when he was asked to walk Nancy down the white silk aisle. Walking past the smiling faces of relatives and friends, Anthony truly felt happy. After the ceremony, Jimmy approached Nancy and Gracie, told them he was proud of them, and wished them a long, happy life. Anthony saw tears of pain on his little brother's cheeks as he turned to leave. Vanessa squeezed Anthony's hand. She looked at him as he stepped into the passage. "Love you," Anthony said, hugging Jimmy. "I love," Jimmy tried to answer but was too choked with tears. "Call your mentor," the waiter said as Jimmy hurried out of the country club pavilion. On May 27th, Natalie Arnold gave birth to Clara Marie Arnold. On June 1st, Anthony gave Jimmy his final instructions, called him a fool, and stormed out the doors of Whitehead Generators. In the parking lot, he got behind the wheel of a rented motor home and drove to the Spanish Armada apartments. He didn't even have time to park the bulky vehicle before Vanessa was already running down the stairs with a suitcase in her hands. "You can't tell me it's all your stuff and all of Clarissa's stuff and all of Bunny's stuff," Anthony said. "You're crazy too," Vanessa smiled. "This is my suitcase. Bunny and Clarissa's suitcases are still upstairs." "You're not bad yourself," Anthony laughed. "Well, let's go see your beautiful little sister." They went upstairs together. Natalie proudly showed them the still somewhat wrinkled and bruised baby. The trip was a surprise for Bunny and Clarissa. The girls rushed out of the school building, happily surprised to see their big sister and Mr. Tony waiting for them at the entrance to the school parking lot. "Nessie! Mr. Tony! What are you doing here?" Bunny asked, hugging them. "Come to see if there are any little girls who would like to go to Disneyland," Mr. Tony said. "Are we going to Disneyland?" Bunny screamed. "Mr. Tony, you're not kidding, are you?" "CL," Clarissa asked, hardly believing her ears. A week later, for burned but happy people were back on I-10 heading west. Bunny leaned on Mr. Tony and kissed him on the cheek. "Mr. Tony," she said. Anthony replied, turning on his turn signal to change lanes. "Mr. Tony, you need to marry Nessie," said Bunny. "Oh, why is that, Bunny?" Anthony asked. "Francis Teresa Arnott," Bunny said. "Who told you my name?" Anthony asked, surprised. "Santa Claus," Bunny suggested, not wanting to tell the 7-year-old that her mother had provided a file on her older sister, which included Bunny's real name. "But tell me, why should I marry Nessie?" "Because she loves you," Bunny said. "I love you too." "Well, that's a really good reason," Anthony nodded. "So, will you do it?" Bunny asked. "Maybe," Anthony replied, looking in the side mirror. "Come on, boy, get away from me, okay?" When they pulled up to the apartment, Anthony was just glad to get out of the driver's seat. Bunny and Clarissa were annoyed when Anthony woke them up, and this irritation increased when their father pretended he didn't even know they had been away for a week. "Girls," Natalie smiled, "your dad is teasing you. We missed you terribly." Mr. Tony received 3 sleepy hugs and 1 sleepy kiss. Anthony walked down the stairs, his back starting to ache at the thought of having to get back into that big car to return it to the rental agency. Upon returning home, Anthony entered his house and realized that he felt lonely. "Mom, I'm home," he said when Susan answered the phone. "Oh, you're leaving?" Susan joked. "Yeah? Oh, sorry. Is dementia starting yet?" Anthony asked. "Anthony, I hope when you have children, you have a child who looks like you. Do you hear?" Susan snorted. "Love you, Mom," Anthony laughed. "Thank God," Jimmy said when Anthony told him he was back home. "I swear to God, I don't know how you can stand it day after day. I'm going crazy." "Assuming you ever had intelligence," Anthony replied. During their week-long stay, Anthony and Vanessa slept together in a fairly large bed, but since Bunny and Clarissa were within touching distance, they did nothing but hug and kiss. As he stretched out in his bed, his very comfortable bed, Anthony missed Vanessa's scent as it filled his nostrils. He missed the feeling of her warm skin under his palm. In the morning, it was Bunny who opened the door to their apartment. She smiled and hugged Mr. Tony. "Nessie," she said. "Yes, she's still sleeping," said Bunny. "Tony, what are you doing here?" Vanessa asked, her hair disheveled, her face still swollen and covered in sunburn spots. "I've been thinking about all sorts of romantic ways to do this, but I just can't wait," Anthony said and got down on one knee in the apartment's small hallway. "Vanessa, will you marry me?" Looking at the smiling faces of his friends and family, Anthony Marcus Whitehead felt truly lucky. The music grew louder, and Anthony turned to watch Vanessa and Frank step onto the white silk carpet. His heart sank in his throat when he saw his bride in her elegant wedding dress, the very dress that had been his mother's when she married Marcus Anthony Whitehead nearly 5 decades ago. "So, I take it you approve of her?" Anthony asked Susan when she suggested Vanessa wear the dress. Of course, said Susan. And you? Anthony asked. I'm not so sure. Remember, Mom, in a couple of years you will finally grow old. I will be your guardian, Anthony warned. What are your impressions of this story? Long, but still interesting. I'm not very close to the main character Anthony, but still he can be understood no matter what. This story with a fairly logical and pleasant ending, what do you think? Share your stories under this video and do not forget to subscribe, that would be the first to know about the release of videos on our channel. See you soon.